month we've been using the Kybalion pretty heavily to kind of talk about some ideas, things that are familiar to us all, and we're going to continue to do that. Earlier this month, I took the topic, the main event, using a quote from Abraham Hicks that says that the main event has never actually been the manifestation, but how you feel at the moment. Many times we want to get to whatever that main event is, that goal, that dream, that thing, and we think that then we'll be happy, then all will be well. But actually the truth of life is that it's about how you feel in the moment, and it's based on how you feel. Then that's how we actually create what it is that we desire and create the main events. In the following week, I took the topic illusions in, taking the idea that you can't get there from there. And so as we think about the events that have happened in Ferguson and the events that have been happening all summer, it's easy to get angry and upset and want to operate from that place, right? To want to do something from that place. But you cannot get to peace, justice, unity, harmony, and love from anger. And we've talked about this in other ways to look at as we're moving up the emotional scale. Anger is important. Frustration, annoyance is important. That's a signal, that's an indicator, but we must move up the scale, move to the place of courage, and up through courage to joy, enlightenment. And from that place, we get inspired ideas. From that place, then we can do something that will actually bring about the change, the justice, the peace, the love, the unity that we desire. So this week, I have a few questions. First, I'm just curious, we'll just take a pulse of the room. How many people are happy with your life as it is right now? Are you happy with your life as it is right now? Okay. Are you happy with your family as it is right now? Are you happy with your neighborhood as it is right now? Are you happy with your country as it is right now? Now it's interesting because I'm sure while we have many hands raised for different questions, we can find something if we choose to focus on that we would say, I'm not really happy with this, or this thing isn't really going well, right? And if we stay with that idea for a long period of time, it then brings us into frustration and annoyance, and then we start to think about what somebody did or didn't do, what they said or didn't say, and then we just find ourselves moving lower and lower on the emotional scale, and if we continue, we can move way down into apathy and depression. But what I find that's interesting is that when we find that we're unhappy with something that's happening in our lives, whether it's our life in general, our family, our neighborhood, our country, our job situation, our workplace, whatever it may be, I've found that we actually have to, in order to change that situation, we first have to make peace with where we are. That we actually have to move off of that space of something is wrong in order to actually create what is good. And so this is partially where the topic for me came from, I am where I am. This is part of making peace with what's actually going on. Because when we're frustrated and angry, it's like we're here in Brooklyn and you want to be in Boston and you're complaining every moment and every day. I'm not in Boston, I'm not in Boston, but you're here in Brooklyn. Like, this is where you are. And until you make peace with the fact that you're in Brooklyn, then until you do that, then you don't have access to, okay, well, how do I get to Boston? You know, what are the reasons that I want to be in Boston, right? What are those feelings about? So you have to first say, I am where I am. And part of that is really about making peace with where you are so that then you can create the life and the experience that you desire. But of course, as we make peace with where we are, we can say, I am where I am. But of course, quickly I hear what Pastor Greg, that's beautiful, and I understand. I gotta make peace with where I am. But there's still somewhere else I want to be. So how do I get to where I want to be? And this is part of the other part of what we're going to talk about today. I thought it would be fun and interesting and enlightening to dig into the principle of gender from the Kybalion, to really look at how do we then, as we're in this place of saying, I am where I am, as we're in this place of finding peace with where we are so that we can then create what we desire. I want to explain this principle of gender and how we can put it into use. So in the Kybalion, the principle of gender is defined this way. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. That's the principle of gender. Now in the Kybalion, it goes a little deeper and explains, it related to all of the contention that we experience in our world of men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and women are complicated and men are dumb, and men can't understand women and women can't. All of these stereotypes, when we start to hear gender and we start to hear masculine and feminine, it immediately wants to take us to these sort of fixed stereotypes. And so what I find helpful and interesting is that the Kybalion goes deeper, and it says that the word gender must be understood, that the word gender is derived from the Latin root meaning to beget, to procreate, to generate, to create, or to produce. So, as we're talking about the principle of gender, we can say that we're talking about the principle of begetting. We're talking about the principle of procreating. We're talking about the principle of generation. We're talking about the principle of creation, or the principle of production, right? And so I think that helps us to kind of see this in a different way. That we're not talking about men and women, but we must understand that, as the principle says, everything has its masculine and feminine principle. Now, we may understand this and be familiar with it in other ways, because it exists in all planes of reality. Of course, we have the masculine and feminine. If we were looking at electricity, we would talk about a positive and a negative charge. If we were talking about the law of circulation, we would talk about the giver and the receiver. Or if we were talking about family, we would talk about the mother and the father. What we recognize and understand is that at every level, on the physical world and in the non-physical world, from the largest reality to the smallest reality, gender is present. This idea of begetting, procreating, generating, creating, and producing is present. And so the Kybalion says this. It says that the part of the masculine principle seems to be that of directing a certain inherent energy toward the feminine principle, and thus starting into activity with the creative processes. But the feminine principle is the one always doing the active creative work. And this is so on all planes. And yet each principle is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. This is powerful. And again, I think as we have so many stereotypes around gender and how the masculine and female unite or many times don't live in harmony, I think it's important to understand this last line, which I think is powerful, that each principle is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. So the masculine principle, however powerful we may say it is not powerful without the feminine principle. And likewise, the feminine principle cannot be powerful without the masculine. Just one quick example, if we look at electricity and we look at a light socket, right? The socket itself represents the feminine principle. It represents the receptive principle. Now, what's interesting, there in that socket is so much potential, it's so much power. It can hold so much power, it contains so much power, but it is useless. It has no purpose until something is plugged in, right? But that thing that we plug into it, whether it's a lamp, whether it's a camera, whether it's our phone charger, it has no power in and of itself until it comes in contact with the feminine principle of the electric socket. So this again is what the Kybalion is speaking about when it talks about that each principle is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. Now we may understand and be familiar with this principle of gender in another way. If we go to psychology, we would many times hear about the objective and the subjective mind. Or we might know more about the conscious or the subconscious mind. Or we might know about the active mind or the passive mind. Again, the Kybalion says here that the masculine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called objective mind, conscious mind, voluntary mind, active mind, etc. And the feminine principle of mind corresponds to the so-called subjective mind, subconscious mind, involuntary mind, or passive mind. And I share these because I want us to get a sense of what we're talking about. We're not talking about men and women. We're not talking about one side being better than the other. That's not what we're talking about. We're speaking about principle, and this principle of gender is about the principle of creation. It's about the principle of generation, and it's about the principle of production. And the reason why that's important, because again, as you may be saying to me, Pastor Greg, I am where I am, and I know that I have to make peace with that, but I want to create something else. And here I'm bringing this principle here today to clue us in on how we now can then shift and change and create what we want. And so the Kybalion goes a little deeper and gives us what it calls the master key. This is my favorite part. Now the master key is the me and the I. And what we must begin to understand is we've talked about all these other things sort of out there, right? Objective and subjective mind, and conscious and subconscious mind, and we've talked about light sockets and these things sort of out there. The me and the I speaks directly to us. So what is the me? Well, the me it's our thoughts, our feelings, our opinions. The me is maybe where we're from, or where we live, or what we wear. The me may be our likes or dislikes. The me may be our habits. The me, we all have that sense of, this is me, this is who I am, because, blue is my favorite color, and that's why I have blue on right now. That's me. It's me because I like to eat certain types of food, or I don't. I don't like this type of food. That's a part of who I am. That's me. And we take ownership of that. Many times, and the Kybalion talks about this in the chapter. I encourage everyone to read this chapter. That many times we also associate our me with our clothes. So much to the point that, if something happened to a piece of clothing that you were wearing, if someone spilled something on you, I've had this experience, where the rest of your day just doesn't go well. You just feel like somebody did something to you because something happened to your clothing. Yes. So that's that idea of the me. That's who the me is. There's nothing wrong with that, but we have to just understand that our sense of me, that's what that is. Our thoughts, our feelings, our opinions, maybe where we're from, where we live, what we're wearing, our likes, our dislikes, or our habits. So if that's the me, then what is the I? The I, as it's expressed in the Kybalion, it says this. It says that the I is a mental something which is able to will that the me act along certain creative lines, and which is also able to stand aside and witness the mental creation. It goes on to say that we have the power or the ability to actually create. It says that we have an ability to project an energy from the I to the me, a process of willing that the mental creation begin and proceed. Now what's interesting is for many of us, and for some period of our lives, we only thought we were me. We only lived as if we were me. We only lived as though we were simply our likes and our dislikes. We only lived as if we were simply what we were wearing or not wearing. We simply lived as though, because of where we were from, that's our identity. But what the Kybalion is saying to us, yes, the me is there, and the me is part of who and what you are, but you have an I. And this I is so powerful that it's a mental something which is able to will that the me act along certain creative lines, and which is also able to stand aside and witness the mental creation. Now, why do we know this is true? Well, think about it. Because I'm sure it's true for each and every one of you in this room that although your me may have included where you came from or where you were born, and that was part of your identity, at some point in your life you decided to do something different that maybe was counter to what you had seen in your family. You decided to do something different that may have been counter to what you saw your friends doing. But how or why did you achieve that, and how or why could you believe that to be true? Because your I began to speak to your me and began to will, as the Kybalion says, along creative minds, and then which is able to stand aside and witness the mental creation. And so your I began to rise up. You began to say that I am this, I am that. I recognize that I can be whatever I want to be. This is why we can tell children that you can be whatever you want to be. This is why we have the powerful stories of I think I can, I think I can. Right? It's awakening and speaking to the I that yes, your me is who and what you are. But what's interesting to me about the me is that the me always changes. Yes. Right? There are things that you love and lost your mind over as a child that mean nothing to you now. Right? There are things that you loved and may have been the center of your world even weeks ago that no longer means anything to you. Right? Because the me changes. The me is beautiful. The me is wonderful. But it changes. The I is the directive principle that directs the me. This is again why we can be, do, or have anything in our lives, because there's an I and a me. I found it interesting. One of the chapters I love in Think and Grow Rich is a chapter on faith. I listen to it all the time on my iPod just because it keeps me in a certain vibration. And one of the things I love that Napoleon Hill writes there, he says that the repetition of affirmation of orders to your subconscious mind is the only known method of voluntary development of the emotion of faith. Essentially, what he is saying is that The only known method for you to develop faith, to create the life that you desire to be, do, or have whatever you want, is to awaken your I and have your I am, that is within you, to speak to the me, which is the projection of you out here in the world. That's the only known method to develop this, what I love he calls the emotion of faith. Yes. Have you ever heard of faith being called an emotion? Now it's interesting because we talk a lot about emotions and feelings. We talk a lot about the feeling tone and getting into that place. And what I've begun to recognize is that faith is actually an emotion that we must develop. Because when you're in absolute faith, when you're in absolute knowing, you feel something. Yes, yes? It's not just a scientific fact. It's no longer just a logical fact. It's no longer an analytical fact. It's no longer something that was written down on a page that you read or that you saw. But the emotion of faith is something that you know it beyond a shadow of a doubt, even when you cannot see it outside of yourself. And you feel it within your being. And what that is, that's the I speaking to the me. So if you haven't guessed it already, as we talk about this principle of gender, the I is the masculine principle. And the me is the feminine principle. And so the Kybalion speaks about these tendencies, the masculine and feminine tendencies. The tendency of the feminine principle is always in the direction of receiving impressions, while the tendency of the masculine principle is always in the direction of giving out or expressing. The feminine principle has a much more varied field of operation than has the masculine principle. The feminine principle conducts the work of generating new thoughts, concepts, ideas, including the work of imagination. Now what's interesting, we can actually see that played out even with our physical representation of masculine and feminine. What I love and find so beautiful is the depth of women, right? That a woman's imagination generally far exceeds that of men, generally. We're talking about tendencies here, right? When I think about, I was thinking about my grandmothers, and Yolanda and I were talking about this yesterday. I think about the ways in which they were able to create the home that we all knew and loved. Yes, my grandfathers were successful, entrepreneurs, successful in education and all of these things. But for all that they did, what was powerful is the way that my grandmothers could operate from this tendency, as it says, that it conducts the work of generating new thoughts, concepts, ideas, including the work of imagination. And it required that feminine principle, that work of imagination, that new thought, those creative ideas to be able to make the house into a home, right? Just having the funds to pay for that home, that's not it, right? That doesn't make the home. It requires this feminine principle. Now what's interesting is any person on this earth that you have seen do something powerful on this earth, they must have tapped into this feminine principle, right? It's not enough to walk around, and I've said this before, it's not enough to walk around and just say, I am strong, or I am powerful, I am rich, I am wealthy, I am prosperous, without having a receptive feminine principle working and operating within you. And so this is why many times as we have seen the vilification and the repression and the denial of the feminine, this is also then why we are not experiencing the world that we desire, because it's like a wall has been placed there between the masculine and the feminine, and it's a harmonious relationship that must happen within us, right? A harmonious must happen within us. Now, the other thing that's interesting here, the Kybalion speaks to it so clearly, I love it. It says here that the majority of persons really employ the masculine principle but little, and are content to live according to the thoughts and ideas instilled into the me from the eye of other minds. This is interesting, because part of what's happened when we're in this place of frustration, part of what's happened when life is not working the way we want to work, part of what's happening when we're in relationship after relationship and we can't understand why it's not what we want it to be, part of what's happening when our bank account seems to just keep going down to zero or negative and we don't know why, is because we have actually believed the word, the so-called truth of other eyes, and allowed that to influence our me. Why do I say that? Because what we must understand is that this me principle, this feminine principle, is receptive and will always receive. Now, if we look at it, as I was just talking about the electric socket, that socket does not care what's placed in it. It will power anything. Whatever is given to it, it will power it, right? Similarly, if we look on the human level, we understand that a woman can become pregnant pregnant by any man, right? It doesn't matter who he is. It doesn't matter what kind of job he has. It doesn't matter if he's worthy or unworthy. It doesn't matter if he's going to be a good father or not. A woman can become pregnant by any man. The feminine principle, the me, is receptive, always receiving something from an I. And so on an energetic level, on a vibratory level, what we must begin to understand is that an I is always speaking, an I is always giving out direction, an I is always guiding us. But we then have to decide, is it the I of ourselves or is it the I of someone or some other thing? Is it the I of the media? Is it the I of the government? Is it the I of some old ancient beliefs? Is it the I of you're unworthy? Is it the I of someone else that says you're not forgiven? Is it the I of someone or some other thing that says because this thing happened to you back in 1980 you could never succeed? Or are you going to be the I am that you are within yourself and begin to direct the me within yourself? Because it will take any instructions, it will take any direction. That's why I love Kybalion Hill. And again, I listen to it all the time. It's the only known method of voluntarily developing the emotion of faith. Because again, there's always an I, and there's a receptive me within you all the time, right? And we recognize that as children, we were wide open, right? As children, our me was there, and we learned and accepted certain I or I am statements from our families. We learned and accepted certain I or I am statements from our schooling. We learned and accepted certain I or I am statements from our city or from our culture. And that's wonderful. Because part of what that does, and Abraham Hicks speaks to this a lot, part of that, what that did was just allow us to experience life and then begin to understand what we want and what we don't want. So please hear me, I'm not vilifying any of those other I am statements. I bless it, it's all good, that's why we can say it. I am where I am. But now I am recognizing that I have a power within myself. A power within myself that's so brilliant, and I love it. Again, in the Kybalion, it says we have the ability to project an energy from the I to the me, a process of willing that the mental creation begin and proceed. We can will ourselves from a vibratory internal place, not from a working hard place, into being, doing, or having whatever we want. So how do we get there? How do we get from where I am to where I want to be? Well, we have to start living in the I am. The I am that you decide. Because again, as I've spoken to, our emotions, our feelings, our habits, our likes, our dislikes, they change. And we've all experienced that. There are things that, I used to love back in the day that I don't anymore. There are things that I used to do back in the day that I don't do anymore. We all can look at our lives and say, oh wow, things change. The things that I like change. The things that I dislike change. My sense of identity. I grew up in Silver Spring. I grew up in the DC area. I love that area. I still have a certain level of pride for being from that area. But in truth, when I go home, after a few days, I'm like, I need to be back in Brooklyn. Like, Brooklyn is home for me. Like, this is part of my me now. Even though I love and appreciate where I came from. So we recognize that these things change and that sense of identity changes. That is beautiful and important, because if you can recognize it, then that means that anything else in your life can be changed. That means that you can speak from your I am and begin to change anything in your life. And what I also understand is that when we live from this world, this changing world of the me, again, the me is beautiful, and how we present ourselves, however we choose to, is beautiful. But if we live cut off from our I am, and we live simply from that me place, what begins to happen, that's when the victim consciousness comes in. Because then it's like, oh, well, all these things are changing, and I don't know what to do, and but this happened and that happened, because it's all happening out there. That's where you're not in power. That's where you don't have power. And so that's why we must employ this principle, this masculine principle of the I am, and let it be in harmony with the feminine principle. And what I love to say all the time is that when you unite your I am principle with your I have principle, which is the feminine, you then begin to make love within yourself. When you're making love to the dreams, your goals, your visions, your desires, that is what is necessary to then begin to create. So, I am where I am, and it's all good, right? I am where I am, and why is it all good? Because I know that where I am, right where I am, peace is available. I know that right where I am, one of my favorite affirmations, wherever I am, that's where God is. the word. I am where I am, and where I am, God is. Where I am, love is. Where I am, power is. Where I am, courage is. Where I am, possibility is. Where I am, forgiveness is. Where I am, worthiness is. I am where I am, and it's all good because right where I am, things can change. It can only change here in the now, where I am. Right here where I am, new money can come in because it can only happen here in the now. Whatever I am, that perfect relationship that I desire is here now because it can only happen in the now. I am where I am, and it's absolutely all good. On that, let's stand, let's stand. Thank you, God. Amen. Do you understand who and what you are? Do you understand that you have this powerful principle operating in and as you right now? There is a me and an I. Yes. And I encourage you to look at your lives this week and say, where have I allowed someone else's or some other person's I am influence, inform, and direct, and will the me within me to be something that actually doesn't serve me? To actually be something that I don't even want. But now we sit back on the seat of power. I love the image in ancient Egypt that you have the pharaoh, which represents this masculine principle. But the pharaoh always sits on the throne of Isis, which represents the feminine. Isis is the mother, is the divine mother. And what's interesting is just that physical symbol was a representation of this unity, that although Pharaoh may have been so powerful, although Pharaoh may have been directive, although Pharaoh may have been the eye, Pharaoh recognized, there was a symbolic recognition of the need for the I have, or the me principle, the feminine principle, and that was the principle that held him up. That was the principle that allowed him to be great. Oh my God. That was the principle. And so we find that this principle is always in operation and has always been symbolized in so many powerful and perfect ways. Joseph and Mary, the I and the me, that then created the Christ. Are you ready to create the Christ within you, to birth the Christ within you? That's a Christmas message right there. Hold that one for later. And so we lift up our voices in prayer. Mother, Father God, I am just grateful for these principles. I'm grateful for this knowledge and this information, not just to be puffed up with knowledge, but to now take this knowledge and information and apply it to whatever is happening in our life right now. Yes, there is a moment where we may have forgotten how powerful we are. We may have forgotten that we have this ability to create, to generate, to produce, to beget that which we are desiring. We may have forgotten that there is a masculine and feminine principle always working within us, seeking to come together to create. But now that we know this, we are choosing to make love within ourselves. Now that we know this, we are choosing to bring the focus back to that which we are desiring to see and experience, to do and to have on this earth. Oh, I'm so grateful for these powerful creators, these powerful generators and producers of life itself. I look forward to seeing the brilliant manifestations, the beautiful manifestations that come forth as their lives, as they have decidedly and voluntarily and consciously united their I am with their I have, consciously united the I with the me, and created their perfect world. We lift up our voices now and release these words, knowing that you will bring it forth easily and effortlessly, knowing that our work is to direct and speak the desire, and the universe will bring it forth without fail and without denial. We know that it is already done. Oh my God. So, in joy and appreciation, we lift up our voices and we say amen. Amen. Ashe. And so it is. So it is. Thank you, God.